Welcome to this episode of the Nothing Ventured Primer with me, Arish Shah. In these Primer episodes, we explore the insights and backgrounds of our guests to give you a bit of an idea of what they've been up to and how they got involved in the tech and venture ecosystem. Enjoy. This season of Nothing Ventured is sponsored by Odin. Odin helps angels, VCs, and founders to raise and deploy capital seamlessly. You can structure your SPVs and now run your funds, handle capital calls, portfolio management more smoothly and easily in one place. Founders use Odin to raise their entire round in a few clicks by simply sending investors a link and receiving investments immediately. Odin works with over 5,000 investors and over 150 emerging fund managers and angel syndicates globally. Head to joinodin.com to learn more. That's joinodin.com. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Nothing Ventured Primer with me, Arish Shah. Today, I have the most incredible guest with me in the studio. I am talking to Sam Beni. Sam is the founder of Platin, a platform that reimagines networking with advanced AI that curates your connections for meaning and value, unlocking networking's full potential. Prior to founding Platin, Sam was head of innovation at Tech Nation and had founded and exited multiple deep tech ventures. Sam, so great to have you in the studio with me. Finally.
We made it happen.
Yeah, it's been like a couple of months in the making for sure.
Yeah.
Let's dive straight in. So in the primer, obviously, we want to get a bit of a feel for your background. So for our guests, what was your first, or for our audience rather, what was your first ever job?
Very good question. Actually, not many people know that. Since I was a child, I always wanted to be a designer, right? Always.
Yeah.
And the main reason for that is because like my father, so entrepreneur as well, and however been very, very hard to see him kind of like going through that entrepreneurial journey. I saw him maybe like 6 months in my whole life, right?
Wow.
Because he's always around and doing something else, and so I didn't want to be him, right? So I wanted to just draw and do some design work, and I found my passion in really cars when I was a kid, and I was like, I want to be a car designer one day, right? So and I became really good at it when I was a kid. When I was a teenager, I think it was like 13, 14, I was like an amateur car designer.
Amazing.
And I had some opportunities to work with a few car companies, and that's where I ended up doing some early junior kind of like automotive design. And that was my first job, actually.
That's ridiculous. Like most guests we have on is like McDonald's or like a supermarket. You went straight into designing cars. That's pretty awesome. And what did you do before you got into the tech and venture ecosystem then?
Yeah, so that's a long story. You want to jump in right now?
We're gonna get into a lot of this detail in the main podcast, but okay. Directly before, what were you doing? So
before tech, well, I mean, I've always been to some extent involved in tech. But before that, so I had like, when I was a kind of like a teenager, I had a few kind of internships working on some, for example, e-commerce stuff like putting, some mugs and some equipment on eBay and sell them and stuff like that. So that was pretty much like my role before I got into tech, and I got into kind of like entrepreneurship when I was very young. We'll get to that why exactly.
Yeah, and I think the why is really interesting. So, what triggered your move into building technology startups? What was it that really kind of sparked your passion there?
Well, I always had an interest in futurology, right? So one of the reasons I really got out of design work was that because in automotive design, I wasn't aware when I was a kid. I always loved to kind of like I design something on sketch it and I see it on the road. Yeah. But soon I understood that actually from design to production, it takes between 3 to 5 years, right? Imagine that, explaining this to a 16, 17-year-old. It was like, wait, what? I don't want to do this anymore. And then I saw one of my good friends who's been quite senior in automotive design. And, I saw him that he wasn't really happy. And I said, like, in 20, 30 years' time, I would be him. Mm-hmm. Would I like to be him? I said, definitely no. And then, unfortunately, which is a long story, we'll get to it. Some issues happened, and I came to UK, and then, for lack of better options, I had to get into entrepreneurship.
Yeah. So it was like the typical kind of migrant story. Yeah. You have to be an entrepreneur to survive. And what do you reckon you'd be doing if you weren't in the venture ecosystem?
I really thought about this. I think I've got a bit of passion around politics, quite frankly. I think I would have been some sort of a politician.
Also something we're going to get into, I think, when
Yeah.
we talk a little bit later about Tech Nation. But okay, and so do you think like local politics or like nation sort of state politics?
I would love to be, on a national side, but possibly I would have, depending on my age, but I would have gone for kind of like aiming for be an MP or something like that.
Amazing. I mean, it's great. Like, I think so many of us are willing to kind of talk about politicians negatively, but we don't necessarily think about the actual amount of work that goes into it. I think the amount of service that you actually essentially give. And, realistically speaking, again, yes, their salaries are high in terms of, what I guess the average or median person would earn, certainly here in the UK, but actually they're nowhere near as high as some, business owners or leaders or whatever. So there's, a huge amount of work, huge amount of sacrifice for essentially not a lot of love from the general population.
Sure, as long as we're not talking about their second and third and fourth jobs.
Well, of course, yeah, but that might be getting far too into the politics of it. So let's talk about Platin, right?
Yes.
So what does it do? Why does it need to exist? And what stage are you at with it?
Of course. So after Tech Nation, and we'll dive a bit deeper later on the podcast about what happened, I was really on a journey of self-discovery. Last time on my other venture, I lost all of my hair in a matter of 6 months, middle of pandemic, right?
Oh, wow.
It was very tough to scale a company in middle of pandemic. So I didn't want to start another company, quite frankly with you. And I had really good opportunities coming my way from the venture side, from the VC firms and so on. However, there was an opportunity specifically around creating access, right? And it's really valuable for me because it connects with my personal mission, which is ultimately creating access and democratizing access for technological advancement across the world.
This season of Nothing Ventured is proudly sponsored by Emerge One. Emerge One provides fractional CFO support to venture-backed tech startups and scale-ups. They work with businesses from seed to Series B that have been backed by some of the UK, US, and Europe's best venture capital funds. They provide support from capital allocation and management, KPIs and reporting, fundraising support, financial modeling, investor relations, and investor management. Come check them out at emergeone.co.uk when you're scaling fast and have need of a CFO.
And we had an opportunity here specifically around building a platform on to be able to actually give access to networks across the globe. Because if you're looking into it right now, so for example, you and I right now, we're in London, right? We've got people in San Francisco, people in New York, Singapore. These are all physical locations that people have got like physical proximity to these networks. And therefore, as a society, we decided to put all of our eggs into 1% of the society. And therefore, out of this 1%, you've got individuals such as Elon Musk, Steve Jobs, and so on, right? And these individuals can innovate because they've got access to network, access to capital, access to talent, and so on. But these are 1% of the overall internet users, people, and 99% are losing out. How do we know that actually the next Elon Musk is not actually in San Francisco, but in Chad or in Indonesia or in India, somewhere else, right? We don't know. But because
we don't have the discoverability, essentially.
We don't know, and they don't know themselves, quite frankly, in this case, because ultimately they don't have access. They never become the person they're supposed to become.
Yeah, it's kind of that whole thing about how many artists go undiscovered because they never picked up, or how many like great flautists are out there that never picked up a flute, right? And not only do they not have access, they don't have proximity, right? And or they are in situations where access and proximity would be lovely, but they've still got to put food on the table.
You're spot on. I watched a documentary, actually. I think is a great one. I recommend everyone to watch it. It's called Science of Success, right? And it's all about actually the artists and how artists become famous. And they've done a study in the university, and they found out those artists that are really famous is because they had a very good network.
Yeah.
And there were better artists around them, but they never became famous because they didn't have a good network.
It doesn't pay to be right, it pays to be first, right?
Exactly.
It's kind of that sort of thing. And you see that, I think, not just in art, but I mean, even in venture, right? It is purely a relationship-driven game. There are I mean, I speak to founders all the time who don't have access to those networks, have great products, but for whatever reason have, didn't have the relationships, didn't have the knowledge, and have probably, put themselves at a disadvantage. Whereas if they'd had those networks, they probably would have done things slightly differently. And so from your perspective, Platin needs to exist to kind of leverage or uncover even these pockets of untapped skill and resource and entrepreneurship or whatever it might be, right?
Absolutely. It's a dynamic system. So for us, it's all about democratizing access, right, for all individuals who utilize our platform in this case. And in order to do that, we build interconnected communities and networks, right? Because I spent a month in US not long ago and went from East Coast to West Coast. You see amazing companies, right? In New York, in Atlanta, in San Francisco, New Orleans, and so on. But these pockets of hubs are not connected in any shape or form. Not at all.
I was just going to say, sorry to interrupt again.
No worries, please.
We just had Nathaniel Harding on the podcast. He's the GP at Cortado Ventures in Oklahoma. And, he was describing, they've just raised an $80 million fund. It is the largest fund in Oklahoma, which, if you think about it, 80 million is like considered an emerging fund, I think.
That's right.
By most people, right? But still, incredible. But exactly that. It's like he's in a region which is untouched, unthought of. Everyone kind of flocks to the West Coast or the East Coast. No one thinks about these great swathes in the middle where there's so much stuff happening because there's just not enough interest, right?
Spot on. And for us, it's all about to create these interconnected networks, not just in the US, but across the globe.
Yeah. And so what stage are you at with it?
Well, we've been working on it for the past 5 to 6 months, myself and my co-founder, Brianna. And for the past 2 months, been kind of like scaling, right? We've gone from like 2-3 of us to 15 people for the past 2 months. So it's going well. It's going well. We've honestly, I've looked into maybe more than 6,000 companies in my previous job at Tech Nation. I'm biased, obviously, but I think we've built a Class A team.
Amazing. So let's switch tack a little bit. You are, as you said, you have a real interest in futurology and futurism. Yep. So let's talk about 3 technologies that you're really excited about right now. I'm guessing why. I'm guessing I know one of them at the very least. But yeah.
Should I be boring? AI. But what AI even is, right? So that's a big question that no one can really answer, right? Because where software ends and AI begins is a massive question that all the experts are fighting over. But I would say ultimately what I mean by AI here is that augmentation of intelligence of individuals, right? That's really, really interesting for me, right? The democratization, some people call, of intelligence in this case, artificial intelligence. So AI for sure, without any doubt. But also I'm super, super, super hyped about quantum computing and quantum technology as a whole. I think if we combine quantum with machine learning, which is a case is a quantum machine learning, QML, and dive a bit deeper, we're going to answer many of our deepest questions about even our existence. And the third one, it's all about convergence, right? Yeah. I think the third one I will reserve in this case because, obviously the answers would be like, AR, VR, that, blockchain. Yeah. But in this case, I have to say it's because this decade, I always said that in 2020s, we are in the decade of convergence. Yeah. And that means that the technologies are actually combined together to create a new one, right? So for example, people are talking about metaverse, but metaverse is not really a technology. It's a convergence of AI, blockchain, and VR. Yeah. And so I would say I would reserve the third one to see what comes up.
Yeah, I think that's a really smart answer. It's also a really cheeky one. One of the reasons I say that, we've had Theo Priestley on the podcast as well, who is a professional futurist, and his words exactly that is the convergence of these technologies that are going to take us to the next level. I mean, we've already seen the kind of platform shift with AI over the last sort of year, let's say, but as these technologies start intermingling, as the costs come down, as smart people start doing smarter things, and already we're seeing kind of like just the progress of even things like ChatGPT, where now they have the vision tool where essentially, or image recognition, where they can essentially create code from a sketch, right? Like, I mean, that is sort of the stuff of absolute kind of science fiction, or would have been, even 5, 8, 10 years ago, right? But today it's kind of reality. So no, I love that. I absolutely agree. I think convergence is probably going to lead to the next platform shift again. And I think we'll keep seeing these platform shifts. If you really think about the last major platform shift, it really was mobile technology, right?
Absolutely.
Like prior to this.
Yes.
Sam, absolutely awesome having you here in the studio with me today. Thank you so much for joining me. I cannot wait to get into the detail on some of this stuff in the main podcast.
Super excited.